Hello world, this is Stefan of Lendrigan Games. This time around I've been working on basic combat. I don't have any animations yet, so whenever the Minotaur would swing his Tetsubo, I just have him flash blue. Unfortunately, I've had a couple bizarrely sleepless nights this last week, so that's impeded my progress. But on the plus side, in order for it to impede my progress, that means that I've managed to get myself coming back to this after getting off of work. So hooray for that. Yeah, there's not much else, so I'm going to go into the ramble now. This isn't the first idea that I've had for a heavy metal game. My first idea was a fighting game where fighters would have their soundtrack elements of a subgenre, and during the fight, the parts would mix with each other. For example, one fighter would have black metal, one would have thrash, and the background music would end up being a mix of the two. My second game idea was heavily inspired by Moonstone, A Hard Day's Night. Players would be able to choose between 5 set characters, each one representing a subgenre of metal. They would take turns to run around a map and get into fights, and the winner would be last man standing. Of course, whenever they'd fight each other, then the elements would mix again. Of course, that was all before and also why I made a decision to jump into the deep end of heavy metal and listen to exalted bands such as Creator, Dimmer, Borgir, Morbid Angel, Hellhammer, Sabbat, Celtic Frost, Faceless, and so on and so forth. And then I realized that artists have more differences between them than to the subgenres. Both of my original ideas have since been tabled. I brought up that aspect of the game because I approach game creation from the perspective of the end user. Mixing and matching elements of subgenres of metal just wouldn't have enough of a difference between various combinations that the player would be able to immediately tell one mix and match from another. Of course, if I claim to be using the perspective of an end user, what is my experience as one? Well, I've got a list of 50 games that have left positive impressions on me and that I would enjoy playing again should I return to them. Of course, this is going to be in 5 parts. I've ordered the list more or less by era of release. I wouldn't be able to order anything from best to worst, partially because it would just be impossible for me. And the other part is because in creative industries, distinction trumps superiority anyway. So this particular ramble will be on the third console generation. While fitting in computer games alongside console release timeframes, I had to do a fair of legwork to more or less sort those into there. And actually, I was surprised to see how late in life of consoles came DOS. Then again, I was born in the mid 80s, so I didn't personally experience that part of history. Still, separating computer game releases by console time windows is as good as any method, and a far side more immediately recognizable than using for time frames Apple IIgs, 386, 486, and Pentium 1 through 4. Number 1. Kirbys Adventure in Dreamland. My gaming started with the Nintendo Entertainment System. While I would prefer to start at the very beginning, so to speak, the very first games that I played were Jackal and Legendary Wings, neither of which entranced me so much as to make it onto this list. For those of you who don't know, Kirbys Adventure follows Kirby, a carnivorous, predatory pink marshmallow that assumes the identities and physical attributes of his victims, placing him somewhere between Pond People and the Blob. The gameplay is a platformer with conflicts being resolved through a mix of body snatching and wanton homicide through the use of the newly acquired abilities. Unique mechanics aside, I love the game's playground kind of feel. Levels don't come with time limits, no specific activities ever punished or encouraged. It has secret areas, but you don't have to find them. The game just lets you do as you feel, especially in the overworld. I've sunk several hours on moving about the overworld via tornado ability instead of jumping. Number 2, Quest for Glory. So you want to be a hero. While I've played parts of 1 through 4, I've played the first one the most. Ergo, it sticks out to me the most. Quest for Glory is a mix of point and click adventure and role playing mechanics, and I mean that in the way that I stated in a previous video. While the point and click part presents the challenges, how the player solves the challenge depends on the character's abilities instead of a specified solution as determined by the programmer's biases. For example, early in the game, something flashes from inside a nest on a tree branch. How does the hero get to what's flashing? Does he throw a rock at the nest? Does he throw a fireball at the nest? Does he dislodge the nest with telekinesis? Does he climb up the tree onto the branch? Adding to that, whenever the hero tries to do something, he gets better at doing it. Thus, climbing the tree makes the hero stronger and better at climbing. Casting telekinesis increases the hero's magical capacity and makes him more efficient at casting telekinesis. Long before Daggerfall popularized activity-based character growth, known as the training system, Quest for Glory had already perfected it. Number 3, Scorched Earth. Scorched Earth is a turn-based artillery game where cannons on randomly generated terrain try to blow each other up. Anyone who has played a Worms game knows the general feel of this. What really makes Scorched Earth stick out for me, though, is its metagame. It has a quasi-campaign mode that's simply a number of rounds with levels as randomized as the player wishes them to be. And between rounds is a shop with a vast amount of supplies to be purchased. It has various shield shells, such as light, heavy, and a reflective shield that either bounces the bullets away or causes them to ricoch around inside if they pierce the shell. It has parachutes because if the ground gets blown away underneath the tank, it can fall to its death and explode. It has cluster bombs, nuclear warheads, napalm, and the list goes on and on for both munitions and supplies. How much money the player has for spending depends on how well he has been performing, so comebacks are almost impossible. On the flip side, though, staying on top is supremely satisfying. Number 4, Final Fantasy 1. Final Fantasy is a story-driven game with turn-based combat and upgrading elements. While I consider the PlayStation remake, Final Fantasy Origins, to be the all-time best version, the original NES version is the one that I have played most extensively. Once again, the metagame is the main draw for me. I can't help but appreciate the ability to build an adventuring party any way that I want and still be able to beat the game with it. Of course, some builds are naturally better than the rest, but I've too often seen games claim freedom, but then require specific configurations at a critical point. I will never forgive System Shock 2 for that. Number 5, Final Fantasy 3. The Final Fantasy 3 that was never released in the US until the 2000s is another story-driven game with turn-based combat and upgrading elements. I played a translated ROM of this on an emulator. The ever-expanding list of character classes, interesting abilities for each, and the freedom to switch between them keeps me fond of the game. While I should be angry at it over Garuda for temporarily forcing a party setup, that was the only time that it happened, and it took only minutes out of my preferred setup instead of hours. Number 6, Castle of the Winds. Castle of the Winds is a roguelike game, but with game saving and a home base. I first encountered this game on a CD titled Windows House of Games, alongside nostalgic classics like Ski Free and The Adventures of Microman. I also discovered Chopin on that CD, but at the time I knew the tunes only as Z00.mid, Z01.mid, Z02, and so on. Back to Castle of the Winds, what really keeps it in my mind is ultimately the vast array of magic spells to learn in the game. Removing magic would still leave a decent roguelike, but I'm a sucker for expensive spell catalogs in games. Number 7, Rygar. Rygar is a 2D Metroidvania, meaning platforming, combat, and unlocking new areas. Because it was made before saving games on consoles was solved, I kept my Nintendo on for 3 days straight to beat it. First thing that makes Rygar stick out is his look. While his weapon is technically akin to the Aboriginal yo-yo, it looks like a shield on a chain, and he looks like a mix of Conan and Captain America. As for the gameplay, I'll always think of it as action role-playing in its finest form. He slaps something, he gains strength. He slaps more things, he gains more strength. Character growth is that simple, and it's nice to focus more on slapping things than calculating what enemies can be fought with what statistics. Number 8, the Kunio-kun series. Yes, this is more than one game in one slot, but it's all tied together with a unique engine, making me love every game in the series for a variation of the same reason. Unlike many who revere Double Dragon, I fell in love with Technos for the game Nintendo World Cup Soccer, which shared a cartridge with Super Spike V-Ball. For those who don't know the game, imagine if Midway made a FIFA Blitz game that also allowed characters to kick the soccer ball into each other's faces. That description also encapsulates Technos' engine for its NES games. Cartoonish, stylized action, mostly violence, and improvised weaponry. River City Ransom brings this into focus much more clearly, but if you play translated ROMs of their Kunio-kun games that never made it to the US, you'll see that undercurrent in all of them. For any argumentative pedants out there, yes, I am discounting the very first Kunio-kun on the basis that it both predates and vastly differs from Kunio-kun iconography. On a side note, if you retitle River City Ransom to Rumble in the Bronx, it would be hailed as a superb Jackie Chan game. That also leads me to my insurmountable issue with River City Ransom Underground. I loaded that game up expecting more of the River City Ransom engine, not the River City Ransom plot. I have every problem with every encounter with the plot in Underground, and it won't let me ride from wall to wall on a bouncing tire. Number 9, Gradius. Gradius is a side-scrolling spaceship shoot-'em-up. The difficulty is a strange mix of obviously unfair yet thoroughly satisfying, even with Tetris's game non-ending of do it again but faster. The power-ups do a great job of both empowering the player and simultaneously making the gameplay more tense, since taking a hit resets the ship's strength to 0 in the middle of the level. I just got those lasers too, you evil, cheating, broken piece of... Number 10, Spiritual Warfare. Spiritual Warfare is the absolute best Zelda clone on the NES. It's so good that I still think fondly of Wisdom Tree for it, despite all of their other attempts at Christian edutainment. The gameplay is very similar to the original Legend of Zelda, but instead of buying bombs and acquiring a boomerang, bracelet, strength, better swords, and whatnot, the character, in order to redeem the heathens that roam the world, acquire a donkey's jawbone, fruits of the spirit, the armor of God, and buys vials of God's wrath, which aren't bombs, we swear, I mean promise. The primary means of delivering salvation is to fling fruit at no good atheists like it's rotten. Other means include detonating vials of God's wrath next to them, detonating actual dynamite in a couple areas, and cutting away their delusions with the sword of the Spirit, a double-edged sword that cuts through to the soul like a rocket-propelled grenade. In the end, all I'm trying to say with this is that I have to thank Wisdom Tree for accidentally making a game instead of a teaching tool. Number 11, Base Wars. I'm really not a fan of sports games. Even the ones that I like have aspects not originally intended for the sport in question. Base Wars, for example, is baseball that is played by robots that pummel each other into spare parts. Granted, that's assuming that neither of the combatants brought a gun. After watching NFL Blitz gradually take itself too seriously, ending with Blitz the League, and watching NFL Street take itself too seriously by the second game, Base Wars and Rocket League hold a special place in my heart for taking a sport and asking, how much real life do we really need to imitate with this game?